hands for you. Some days. Thank you.
Oh, yes, darling. Of course, I'm getting my glasses.
Good evening. They're going to ring us in. How's everyone doing? It's a bit cold here, isn't it? It's just me. Nobody should take me to Canada. Right, I think we're going to start in about 5 minutes or less. Thank you to everybody who came on time, and for the rest of you that came late, you made us late. What? You made us late. But thanks for coming, eh? You're like on the panel. Nobody farther than Oregon. Are you thinking? You can use Google Maps. Fine, you can just check where it's. Oregon is like 7 up after Third Mainland Bridge. Nobody from Ikorodu? These are really Tush Island people. Alright, that's good.
Oh, Yaba.
Anybody from Yaba? Yaba is not far.
No, they're either island people or they're coming from Yaba.
Yeah, that's Silicon
Valley.
Silicon, what do we call it? Silicon Yaba now, it's Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley.
I think we should proceed.
No comment. Alright, thank you once again for coming out. Today's episode of the C Series. C Series is the brainchild of Grey Master here. For those of you who don't know, the C Series is conversations, cocktails, and community. So at some point, I believe the cocktails will be flowing freely. Lagos Island for me, please. But I think the most interesting part of this session are the conversations that we have. Today's conversation will be around the startup bill. I'm very excited. It's a topic that's very dear to me. Having been somebody who has played in the space for a few years now, I've been privileged to be on the side of the startups, or the side of, well, it's one side, it's one big happy side, but I'm privileged to be, with startups, with the government, and with neutral, just observing proceedings. But my job today is not to speak, my job is to be the moderator, the host. The experts who will be speaking on the topic are here. So, my name is Fola Olatunji David. I run an early stage fund called Kickoff Africa. And the amazing people on the panel today, we've got Yewande Adewusi. She's the Group Executive Director, Commercial at Tangerine Africa. Please. We've got, I'm supposed to say he's Oriki.
Go on.
No, we've got Tomiwa Alade Komo. He's the CEO of Big Cabal Media. Please put your hands together for him. And last but definitely not least, we've got Iriayo Oladunjoye. She's the head of startups, Lagos Innovate at the Lagos Employment Trust Fund, LSETF. Please put your hands together for her. Great, so we're going to be having a conversation around the Nigerian startup bill today. What does it mean for startups? What does it mean for media? What does it mean from the perspective of government? But before we start that, I'd like to invite Victor Famubode. He's the project manager at the NSP, to give a 2-minute overview of what what the Nigerian Startup Bill aims to achieve. So please put your hands together for Victor. He's not on the program, but I rolled in the last minute.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Just come here so you can show the camera.
Okay. Okay. Again, thank you everyone for actually sparing your time to actually attend today's event. So the Nigeria Startup Bill is just basically a joint initiative between the presidency, the Federal Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy, and also the startup community. So the idea is for these stakeholders or actors to come together and co-create a bill. And the idea behind co-creating this bill is not just to stop at co-creating this bill, but basically looking for ways in which we can harness the potential within the startup ecosystem. And when you look at where we are, with respect to the startup ecosystem, we can see, a startup, an ecosystem that is growing. You would see some of the interesting developments within, this space. But, at some point, you need to go beyond that. So at a point, you need to go beyond just having 5 unicorns, right? You want to be able to grow beyond that 5 unicorns and grow into more or less 50 unicorns. Who says we cannot do it here in Nigeria? Year on year, we should be able to boast of 50 to 100 unicorns. But that can be possible when you have a deliberate plan. And that deliberate plan is just basically saying, let us create a legislation that is focused around growth of startups. And not just growth, but also ensuring that we create an enabling environment for startups to operate. And where we are, which I know you'll be very curious, some would actually know, but we're at a point where the bill is currently with the National Assembly. It's passed second reading in both houses, that's the House of Senate and the House of Representatives. So it has become really important for us to participate in your own way, and not just participate, ensuring that you're also drumming support in your own way. There is going to be like a public hearing that is coming up, I think next month. A date has not been confirmed yet, but the idea is we want this political season to also roll out, if you know what I mean. So after that, you should expect this public hearing at the Senate. So I mean, there is so much that we can accomplish. That's why I think that the bill is in the right path. But for us to be able to accomplish that, it also means that everyone, to a large extent, we need to also come together and ensure this is a success. So again, thank you everyone. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much, Victor. Please put your hands together for Victor. All right, so how we're going to take it is we have about 30, 35 minutes for the panelists to answer questions, and then we have about 10, 15 minutes to answer questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please note them, write them down, and then at the end of the session, we'll take those questions. All right, so jumping straight to it. The topic of today is the Nigerian Startup Bill, a catalyst for ecosystem engagement and collaboration, or another stifling regulatory framework. So I'm going to ask everybody the question, is it a catalyst for ecosystem? And you're not allowed to just say yes or no. Say yes, and this is why I say so, or no, and this is why. All right, so what do you think? Yewande?
I think it gets it's addressing lots of issues that have been there for a long time. You have a situation where there wasn't a clarity for investors or players in terms of what to do, and so it's starting to get some structure so that, and what every startup needs and every environment needs is an enabling environment to just get going. So if we know, if an investor knows I can bring money into Nigeria and I can take it out based on these conditions, this capacity building for these startups as well, which is now in the bill. Because we can all say, oh, I want to start up and everything, and you have no knowledge of how to do it and what would make you scale. Like Victor mentioned, you want these unicorns, but there's some knowledge you need to have to get there. You also have incentives to go into that space as well, tax breaks and whatnot. So I think, yeah, it's a starting point. Lots of discussions to be had on the various points of the bill.
Thank you, Yewande.
So I think it is an enabler, and I think what's been most important actually is the process by which it's being passed. And so sessions like this are not a regular part of passing bills in Nigeria. So I don't know if any of you have ever attended a session like this for any bill at all being passed. I know I haven't. And the entire process of developing this bill has been as collaborative, as involved between government and the tech ecosystem as any that I've ever seen. And not just the tech ecosystem, there's been a lot of stakeholder engagement with the ministries and agencies, the National Assembly. And I think all of that process makes it a bill that should be more productive and that should be more positive as we go forward. The critical thing about bills is what happens after they're passed. And a lot of bills pass in silence, and so are never executed. They never actually get implemented. But this has been passed, or is being passed, with a lot of stakeholder engagement, with a lot of people speaking and supporting it, which I think gives it a better chance once it actually goes live.
Thank you, Tomila.
So I would say, Yewande and Tomila pretty much covered everything, but the big tent approach in which they actually put this bill together is great. I think actually listening to the startup as well, taking into consideration what the investors and the founders need is a starting point in terms of actually the policy that's being made. I would buttress what Tomiwa said in terms of this could actually, the way they've built this bill or this policy could be an example for other policies that are going to be created, because then it's been done very inclusively, where you had sessions like this, they spoke, and they're making every effort to make sure they're available to the stakeholders, all stakeholders, like all the different levels of stakeholders, so government as well as the founders as well as the investors, to make sure they are taking as much as possible. It's a starting point, and I think it's a very good starting point, but like you said, it's after the bill's been passed that we want to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to bring this down to benefit the audience. Why should we care about the bill? Does anybody want to take it? Why should we actually care about this bill? Is there anything exciting? From any perspective, you're a business that can be qualified as a startup in a way. You're a media, you're an arm of government, but I mean, why should we care about this bill? Anybody?
I mean, I'll kick it off. Okay, so as a framework for engaging with the private sector and government, it's an incredibly important bill. Specifically within the startup ecosystem, defining clear rules by which startups can get breaks or support, funds for R&D, the frameworks in which how are your investments treated, how is the money you put into R&D treated. Creating frameworks for all of that and creating a logical set of rules is a critical and important step. But more importantly, it then builds a mode of engagement and gives people a step for further engagement with the government to decide how to engage further. So there are rules, there are things that are not 100% included in this bill right now, but having a bill and a framework, having it implemented, things like the council agent, which is one of the mechanisms of the bill, which essentially is a council that year on year reviews the bill, reviews the rules, reviews the implementation, and advises on how to improve that. Creates a mechanism for startups to continue to engage with the government and say, we want this rule, we want this to improve, we want this to get fixed. And that's important because as people in Nigeria's private sector, a lot of people, particularly within tech, are fundamentally antagonistic towards government and towards government interventions. And while it is well-founded, a lot of that antipathy, it's not very productive. And ultimately, you start to see that if you want real long-term change, it's great to build great companies they have their role, but there are a lot of things that only the government can do. And so ultimately, to have really deep, meaningful change, you need to have private sector engagement with the government in some ways that are productive. And so I think this provides a useful framework for that to happen. And I think also just it's been a big example of being able to work productively. I mean, as a government, I personally would say lots of issues, but we've been able to build a working group for this where you'll be able to find people who actually care genuinely about this issue and are willing to work productively with you on it. And that's useful. I agree.
Thank you, Tamara. Did you want to add something, Yewande?
I think it's just, what are startups trying to do? They're trying to innovate. They're trying to change. And what's happened in the market to date is they are innovating and driving change and reducing friction in spite of the environment. What is going to happen with this bill? They can build it with the environment because the environment is allowing them to do it. So I think that is the major thing for me with this bill. Stop working in like it's amazing. You go anywhere. Oh, it's amazing that came out of Nigeria, and you're like, I mean, you don't know whether that's an insult or whatever. But a backhand comment, exactly. So it would be nice for it not to be a case of that came out of Nigeria in spite of Nigeria's environment, but because of Nigeria's environment would be my take on it.
Yeah. And did you want to add something? Or?
So what I would actually like to add is, like you said, despite we've had unicorns, but you know that we don't really have an enabling environment. So when you're looking like, okay, LSETF is where I'm coming from, and we started this before the start of, we started what we were doing, what the intervention we're doing in the tech ecosystem prior to the start of it being worked on. But when you take it federal and you're going to cascade it down, I think it's an amazingly beautiful thing. It might not cover everything we want, but this is a starting point. So we started off something really small, and it was because we know that there's something in the tech ecosystem that where funds are coming in from outside of the country to the tune of 4.77 billion last year. Tamara, correct me if I'm wrong, please. About that. So yeah. So I mean, if you were getting that where you have an environment that's really, really difficult to work in, could you imagine what you could do if the environment was enabling enough? And what I learned really quickly was a lack of trust, because I'm not directly the government, but I'm an entity of the government. So building trust in the ecosystem where you have techies that are almost cultish is really, is like, let's be honest, it is a beautiful thing. And then when you have someone like Vikas and that, the effort that was put into actually work, you might not want to work together, but if you actually want to do anything, which I learned really quickly was, I might be doing all these things, but you need to dig deeper, and it needs to be policy-led. So if the policy is not favorable, all you're doing is like, you're going to hear stories that, when I say, oh, from Nigeria, is it an insult, or is it a good thing, is what I would say. So
that's good. So I mean, it's good you brought up LSETF, and like you rightfully said, you're an arm of the government or an extension of the government. A lot of the startups in Nigeria are based in Lagos, and you also lead entrepreneurship at the LSETF startups. Now, is this something that the LSETF is only waiting for the bill to land so that we can see your real face or something?
So we're trying. So, I mean, LSETF is already doing what it's doing, and I feel like in every conversation I have about the startup bill is, if it's going to enable the
does everybody know what the LSETF is?
Really?
They don't.
Okay, they don't.
He said yes.
Can you just give
so I'll give a brief overview. So LSETF stands for Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. Like the bill, we're actually created by law in 2016, and the purpose of LSETF, the law that created LSETF, was to create an enabling environment for MSMEs, not just startups, MSMEs to create jobs and wealth in Lagos State, in other words, reducing unemployment. And I think one of the good things we have in Nigeria is the amount of youth we have. So if you could use that to your power in terms of enabling them, opportunities are wild. And one of the pillars of the LSETF is the Lagos Innovates, which is a startup unit, and what we do is focus on the tech ecosystem with the idea of creating an enabling environment. So it's really what the startup bill is doing, but we're not on law. We can tell the lawmakers what we think of what's going on in the ecosystem, but we don't create the law. So seeing this was, okay, you're seeing the work we're doing, you can see that it does work, and you need to actually even further enable us as well as the ecosystem. Examples I could reel off forever, where someone comes and uses one of our interventions, say the workspace voucher, which is access to infrastructure. They start with one employee, and 3 months down the line, they're able to employ 5 people. So that is obviously, it was a national breakthrough.
Feels like when you're in the club and you pop champagne. As you said, they're growing, like pop champagne.
So what I'm saying is, so if I, like a perfect example is one of my beneficiaries that who just became a beneficiary in February. He started off with one person and he's just him working on a startup. But by virtue of actually having access to infrastructure where he doesn't have to think about it, in February to May they've grown to 5 people. So if we're actually trying to solve unemployment issues, working on businesses or startups that will become unicorns in the future, these are things that I feel would enable it, would make it easier for us to do it. It might not be perfect, but it's something to start with.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you very much. You couldn't have said it better. The reason why this resonates with even me personally is I see the work the LSCTF has done off of at the Lagos State level from a law that was passed a few years ago. Now, when I think about if this can be expanded on the macro level, I think the possibilities are endless. I wanted to, on that note, just throw it to Tomiwa. So, obviously, Big Cabal Media, tech, the biggest tech platform in Africa. We enjoy Zikoko, but we enjoy Tech Cabal also, And I've seen some articles about, policy, but is there a way that we can drive a lot more awareness in everybody's mind using the media, using all the channels? And is that something that we're actively pursuing? Is there any value in doing that?
I mean, I will say that Tech Cabal has been actively involved in this process for quite a while now, and we've helped to drive a lot of comms across board for the NSB. We don't do a lot of. It's one of the most important sort of like things that we do outside of our core work is supporting this bill, is working. So we've helped build a comms plan. We have 2 people who've dedicated an incredible amount of their hours to it in terms of just organizing some of these seminars, some of these engagement sessions. There's a fair amount of press, and it's a great team of people working within the comms department of the NSB. From an engagement perspective, there's been a lot of work in traditional media, a lot of work within the tech space, a lot of work in digital, lots of engagement, physical engagement sessions like this. It's a bill. It's not exactly the release of the latest Avengers movie, and so I think there's probably a limit to how much excitement you can generate for it, without
You'd be surprised.
Robert Downey Jr. being present or Scarlet Witch.
Well, listen.
But I think I will say again, and to give kudos where kudos are due, as an engagement process, it's been pretty thorough. There's been a lot of coverage in a lot of publications. Can we do more? Absolutely. And should we do more? I think absolutely we will continue to push. But again, few bills that I've seen have gone through as extensive a public consultation process and as involved a stakeholder outreach process in the media. And so I think it's been pretty strong.
Thank you. Okay, so we've done enough advertisement for the NSB.
Do you guys agree, disagree? Have you heard enough about the NSB?
Have you read about, what would be useful? Like when budget started breaking down the budgets and like this bite-sized information, like key points. We like sachet things in Nigeria. So like key points of and just releasing it maybe in a series or something. I mean
there's a bit of that. If you follow on Twitter.
There's actually something I saw on, I think it was a YouTube channel on the startup bill.
Yeah.
And it's like short videos on what it actually was. And I mean, if you're going to read the bill, and trying to understand in comparison to actually watching the little cartoon character things. I felt like that was really like it dumps it down to, not saying anyone's dumb, or even I went to watch it. No, it dumps it down to like layman's terms to know what it actually is. And I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Great. Yemande, so you voted, you're the first person to vote. It is a catalyst for ecosystem engagement and collaboration. I was watching.
I'm not the go-to.
So tell us exactly how the bill can be leveraged, for business networking, and if it fosters, the business economy. Also from your perspective, you run, or you're a leader in a business that can be classified as a startup. See how I'm qualifying it. Can be classified as a startup. So how do you think the NFB practically can work?
I mean, from taking it from the business collaborative framework, I think no business can do anything by itself anymore. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to be done. And once you recognize that, you're looking at ways to exploit the bill to encourage that. Like you said, I'm a quasi-startup. I'm a bit of an old company trying to do things in a new way. So sometimes I cannot, based on my legacy systems, I can never be as nimble as a real startup, right? So I will collaborate with certain startups to do certain bits of innovation and product development. So as much as you're looking at the bill from, okay, where does it, and the product side of things, it really speaks to that in terms of co-collaboration, in terms of product development. Where can we find synergies? Our company might want to invest in another organization subject to regulatory issues around that. But it's a case of,
no promises.
Anyone in the government is listening, she's obeying
all the rules. But in terms of, and what I do find is that the regulator as well, the regulatory enablement as well. So even, like I keep saying, I'm a quasi-startup. If I want to innovate right now, my regulator will pretty much lock me down along the way. So I'm hoping this bill will allow that freedom to test and learn. I think that's the most important part of any sort of innovation and growth in the market, just that test and learn opportunity that this bill will create. Because right now, the regulator's default is to lock down. It's like lockdown, 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 rules, rules, rules. And if you have too many rules, compliance is expensive. So I can imagine a startup trying to comply with everything a regulator sets down. It's pretty much, for an established company, quasi-startup, it is expensive for us, talk less of a real startup. So, and you also want a situation where you make investments, they don't do U-turns. I think that's very important as well. The U-turn aspect of our environment in terms of when they start seeing any traction, somehow the policy just comes and, So I hope that my desire of this bill, when it's passed and when it comes into implementation, from an implementation standpoint, is that it continues to foster innovation, collaboration, and as well as allow the test and learn environment that you need to develop a business and product development as well.
Okay. I was going to ask you the next question, but I'll give you time to catch your breath. Same question I'm throwing to all three of you. Is there any specific thing that excites you in the bill? And on the flip side, is there something you wish was captured in addition?
Moving along.
I think what excites me, I've spoken about already, is obviously it almost looks like it's mirroring what we were trying to do, but expanding it a little bit more to areas that we hadn't even thought of. We can't go there in terms of we're no lawmakers. What could you have included?
So I'm going to, while you think about that, I'm going to actually cut you short. I want specifics. I'm putting you guys on the spot. So I'll go first.
Okay.
That way you guys can think of
All
it.
right.
So there's, under the tax incentives, there's basically a proposed part where if your startup is, employs people that are fresh graduates, have less than 3 years experience, and they make up more than 60% of your team, of your employees, then you get certain incentives, from a tax standpoint. I think that's great. Because pay your tax, guys. Because I used to run accelerators and I would see university students and I'm like, these guys are making money, but they're going to pay a lot of money in taxes and whatnot. So that's what excites me personally. That's one of the things that excites me about the bill. So at this point, I will pass it on to.
I'll do it. I know it excites me. I have to think about what I need to. Sandbox.
The sandbox, yeah.
Well, okay, I think I spoke too much of a regulation enablement, but what actually really excites me is the fact that they thought about the need for capacity building. I think it's such a buzzword sometimes, but you really need that to grow a business to scale. I think that, there's a group I'm on, and I think I mentioned it earlier, that they just make me feel so excited. I wish I was like 10 years younger or something like that. But you also see the fact that there's a certain level of maturity that isn't there in understanding business and structure and all of these things that make businesses go from an idea into scale. So I think that capacity to understand different parts of business, different parts of product, that you need to, in this startup space, is very important. So that capacity building, if there's funds for that people can tap into, to grow from the level that they understand in terms of it's an idea in my garage or bedroom, to go really huge on it, I think is really important. So that excites me.
Excellent. I really like I think I mentioned it very briefly earlier, the council. So there's a regulatory council that's built into this that engages with the ecosystem and with lawmakers on an ongoing basis. Because my biggest concern with bills like this is how they are implemented and how they evolve over time, I think that's one of the most innovative and interesting elements of the bill, is creating this ongoing mechanism for engagement between the ecosystem and the government, being able to refine this bill over time, be able to refine its implementation over time, and creating a body for engagement, for active engagement. So very often we have non-governmental bodies kind of sitting down by themselves and very little engagement with the government. And then you have government-only sort of boards and the like, where appointment by the president and very little engagement with the people they're supposed to be serving. And so the way this is being constructed, where it's going to be some private sector, some government, I think that gives us a really promising sort of
and the highest
look
level
towards
of
the future.
government too.
Highest level of government, which is where this has been pushed from, to be fair. I mean, this is something that the presidency drove. And so I think that's promising from a long-term engagement perspective. It also means that if you have got investors coming into the country, they've got a high-level body to engage with. If you've got founders with real concerns, there's a set of people to yell at and say, we need this fixed, we need this to be done better, can we push for this? And you need those mechanisms, because otherwise we continue to kind of stay in our separate corners. And so that's exciting.
There are quite a few things, but I'll stick to infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, what the bill is going to lead to in tech parks, subsidized local data facilities, because I guess that's where we started from, and we can see the benefit of it. So if the bill is actually going to lead to this, time up?
No, sorry.
Sorry. If the bill is actually going to lead to actually creating the infrastructure that it's going to in the ecosystem, I think that's our first of all, after law, our main problem that a lot of people look to the government for is creating that infrastructure that you're going to lay your business on. So you're not looking for it. If that's going to come out of the bill, I think that's what excites me the most. And can I add another one? And I think the perspectives of actually creating employment for youth excites me. I need to seeing that, because our security issues are because of unemployment. There's so many issues we had because of unemployment. So if it's going to be an enabling bill to sourcing out infrastructure and unemployment, I mean, I'm done. I'm happy. I'm good.
Nobody spoke about what they would add to the bill. Anybody have thoughts in that
I
regard?
think for,
Sun-
I think we, I mean,
At a
for
bill
me, it's like, it's a place to start. I think that if we think about what could have been there, shoulda, coulda, wouldas won't help us now. And if we waited for the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, we will never get started. So for me, and too many ingredients in a soup can make the soup go off and get you'd just be distracted. There's just too many things. And too many people like the pro is that you can engage all these people, government and private. If you have too many things in it, that expands the stakeholder group and you'll never finish. This thing would not have been documented, it would not be at the House because we would still be engaging stakeholders to make sure everybody's aligned, everybody's perspective is reflected, everybody's happy, and life is not like that if you have too many people. Let's narrow it down, get something going. There will always be everybody thinks a bill is finite. There will always be addendums, there will always be additional version 1, version 2, version 2.125, add clause, whatever. So I think for me, it's fine the way it is as a starting point, and we will keep adding and reflecting. We'll see what happens when it goes live, and there will be changes. But to say let's wait and have everything in the kitchen sink in there, I think would have been pointless.
Thanks, Yolanda. Would you have added anything to it?
I think there's probably more around the infrastructure. I'm very much on UNA's side where get the bill that we can. There are a couple of areas that I've heard conversations about getting more funding into startups, kind of government directly fund startups, and more sort of like more provisions for that within the bill. On the infrastructure side, just obviously there's a massive infrastructure deficit across the country. Can we funnel more funding into that? Can we be more proactive? I think there's incentives in terms of people having access to infrastructure, but not as much direct investment, or forget even direct investment, just sort of like more policy that really sort of like drives the development of that infrastructure. But again, I think attempting to shoehorn those into this bill would guarantee that it's a bill that just never passes.
Exactly.
You essentially step on too many different people's turfs in order to get the money or to define the funding, and so I think it's semi-skinny as it is, and I think it's a great starting point, and then we can start to build from there. So, yeah, probably.
I think we could have put. I think what if we had something specific to speaking to, say for instance, the government ensuring that they took the services of a percentage of the startups, so that you then are actually enabling them for business. We'll have an enabling environment for the startups to build themselves. But who's going to be when you're investing in something, it's not necessarily. Some people think it's only funding. It could be mentorship. It could be anything. So if I'm your first customer, in terms of I'm taking on board, so a percentage, or if it was like sector-wise or whatever it was. But again, like my parents have said, if you keep asking
It's
for too much, then you wouldn't actually start. And what Tommy was happy about in terms of we have conversation with the government and the regulators and the startups, so we can continue to fine-tune the bill. They've given allowance on opening for us to fine-tune the bill as it's going, and it's easier than most that I've read other bills. So they consciously put this in place so that you are able to move as fast as the startup ecosystem is moving, because the ecosystem moves really fast. So yeah.
Great. So we actually are over time right now, but final question. Normally at this is the point where I'll say any more comments or any, but I think to the benefit of the audience, what do you want them to walk away from today, knowing about the NSB and how it affects them? Is there any specific thing you would like them to walk away from here?
I think you just have to be engaged in the whole process. Don't see it as something that someone else is driving. I think you have the opportunity to engage your constituents at what are they doing about it? What are they voting? Are you the one holding it from moving on? So I think those local, the town halls that are happening with your legislators, you should engage them on it to make sure you're making them accountable. Because I think we all tend to think this is something for someone else to drive,
Yep.
and yet we'll say there's no enabling environment for startups. So I think it's that balance of knowing that you have a role to play in moving this can down the road to get it all sorted out and finished and implemented. So.
I think that's a great sort of takeaway. It's critical that as this gets passed and as implementation begins, we stay engaged with it. So beyond the council agents, it's also just being on top of the team, being engaged, following, being able to push and send an email to the team and say, hey, I think there are areas where we could improve this. We should be pushing for X or we should be pushing for Y. It's a fairly responsive, it's not fairly responsive, it's a very responsive team, I will say. And so there is the opportunity to actually shape this thing, both as it's passed and in implementation. And so stay engaged.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would say you don't have to be a startup to be involved in this, because every business, every person will be affected by what a startup does. So if you think about Jumia, if you think about Flutterwave, you don't have to be a startup, you're just a regular person in Nigeria and you're affected by it. So you need to, if you need to go and watch the videos I watch to understand it and make sure you're aware of what's going on, I think you should, regardless of if you're a startup or not. That's what I would say take away from this.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, please give the panelists an amazing round of applause. I think they've been great. I will take 2 questions. Up to 2 questions, so depending on how far we go. Yes, I see one hand. Actually, you can ask your question, and I see it. Yeah, please stand.
So I feel like the conversation has been a bit abstract. So my question is, if you could give like examples of, and you had mentioned that we've seen startups thrive in spite of the environment. So it seems like we don't really need any government intervention. And I may be wrong, like, I mean, you had mentioned about the infrastructure and then just some other things, but like actual examples of like, okay, so if it was a mobility business, because of this startup bill and because of this clause or this extra thing in the startup bill, they can improve X, Y, Z. So on that's on the business side, but then also on the government side, because of the startup bill, there will be more taxes. So case studies in terms of that, and also case studies of like countries that have actually like adopted startup bills and seen like an improvement in their ecosystem as a result of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I'll just take it, I keep saying I'm a quasi-startup. So, and my experience in the space, I worked at a company called Athena a very long time ago. And the work we did then was to work with regulatory agencies to look at how do you create an enabling environment for financial inclusion. You can imagine taking them to India, to Brazil. I've been everywhere to see financial inclusion, right? And you come back and all they did was take the most difficult regulation and say, let's apply that in Nigeria. India was one of the most difficult countries in terms of giving non-bank financial institutions access to do things like mobile money and mobile payments. So imagine I've taken all that money and all that time, and where do they pick? They took from every country we went to the hardest bits of their regulation, right? How can you start a business when everything is the hardest thing to do? That's the practicality of it. If they come with rules day one, do not do this, do not do that, do not do that, then you can never start. But we took them to Kenya, where Kenya, in that time of mobile money, and I'm taking it way back, said, Safaricom, go ye forth and try this thing called mobile money. They had, their banking system was crap. Nigeria is really advanced in our banking system, as you will know. So their banking system, you can even transfer money from Lagos to Kaduna, things like that. There was this whole accident with a bit of a political situation. Things come out of accidents. They were having their elections, and that's how that came up. So you've taken them to meet the regulator in Kenya, and they're saying, no, That is not how we're going to do it. That is very foolish. How can you give a non-bank financial institution any right to move money from anywhere to anywhere? Despite the fact, I always say, the money still sits in a bank. They didn't create a vault in Safaricom for the money to sit in their house. It's still in a bank. But, so that's a practical example where if there was a regulatory sandbox, and I know he says that's my favorite part of the bill, and I didn't want to talk about it, but the fact is that if you can create a space where we can test and learn, pilot solutions without having too much clamping down, then you will see where the friction is, how to reduce it, what's the turnaround time, what do I need, who are the enablers, who do I need to partner with. So I'll take that as the example of what the startup bill can do for businesses that it seemed very high level, but I hope this is a good example. But that's what you don't want by over-regulating before we've even started. I think I don't know if that sort of answers, but anybody else?
So I wanted to give you made mention of the infrastructure, right? So if I used like Lagos Innovator as an example, the pioneering intervention we had was the Workspace Voucher Program, which is access to infrastructure. But we soon found out that the pipeline wasn't good. So we then created a program for getting people from ideation to MVP. But we're almost like a startup, but a startup trying to help startups. Now, if you look at it like, you're now taking it from a national point of view and looking down and saying, if you can work in Lagos State, let's say they looked at us, like they looked at LSTF and what they were doing, you can scale this on a bigger, like scale it up. Even when we did the Idea Hub, we found that some people needed CTOs or they wanted to learn the skill themselves, then we thought of capacity building. But I'm doing this in little volumes. So there's only so many people I can help, and we've got how many people in Lagos State, and I can tell you the amount of beneficiaries I have. It's not even a fraction. But there's so many people that need this interventions. Now, if you put it high level, cascade it down, you don't have to then have an LSTF in different countries, in different states, trying to learn from all their little ecosystems. It's coming, like they've looked at it on a bigger scale, and they're going to say, look, we know this is going to work. We need capacity building. We've seen it work in a different country. So I've had people abroad coming to look for software engineers in Nigeria, but I cannot train them. I can't churn out as many as they need, but there's that gap. And again, I will always revert back to unemployment. So if there's talent deficiency, but you don't have capacity building for it, the bill's going to give me it's going to enable me to do this, and enable to do it multiple times over.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've got 2 hands up, so what we'll do is we'll just take both questions at the same time, and then we can respond to them. Pointing at the back of that gentleman. Does he need the mic? Yes. Oh, you have one there.
Okay, so thank you very much. I really enjoyed this session. And my question would be about, it's 2-layered. The first part is repetition, and the second part is enforcement. On the repetition part, the CBN released a regulatory sandbox. It was drafted in 2020. It was applied in 2021, I think January. And we didn't hear anything about that. It just fizzled out. The NIPC has the OSIC, that's the One-Stop Investment Center, which was supposed to, in theory, was supposed to be a one-stop shop where people came together and all the regulatory agencies you needed for your company was just at one desk, and you got all your licenses, all your certifications, one place. There are a lot of other laws like this, and I've gone through the NSB, and it feels, to an extent, like a concise repetition of laws that already exist and laws that exist in some form. For example, if you're talking about the tax incentives, does it have to be a new legislation? So my question is 2 things. What is so special about this? Why should I believe this will work if OSIC exists in a book, applies, but in real life, I don't know a lot of people that do, and I should know. I'm a lawyer. I think I should know. And let's say, what's this other guy? the regulatory sandbox exists somewhere. So what's so special about this?
Yeah, I was actually going to call Victor to answer it, but I think even,
I can even have it.
even in
I
that
think it's
chat-
bringing things together. That's literally what it's doing. I don't think it's reinventing anything, quite frankly. But Victor could speak more to this, so please excuse me if I'm wrong. But my perception of the bill is that everything is all over the place. You had NIFTA doing stuff, you had CBN, like you said, doing stuff, you have NIPC doing stuff, you have all these different agencies doing stuff at a state level, at a federal level. So for you as a business that is a one-man shop, that's the chief marketing officer, the sales officer, the whatever officer, do you really have time to go and look at all these different agencies and all these different things you're eligible for? What it's bringing is a story of this is what you can have as this type of business in one-stop shop, but for everything pertaining to startups. But I don't know if you guys agree, but that's my opinion.
Victor, do you want to speak? No? Okay. I will say there's a critical, I've mentioned it a couple of times, I think the council agents really, really important. I also think, again, speaking to the process that has brought this and the way, the plans for that process, there's an implementation team to this. And I feel like the challenge we have with a lot of bills is they get passed and then they lie down. And they lie down unimplemented because nobody has thought beyond the passing of the bill. So the opportunity with this is, as part of the development of the bill, they've created essentially a body whose only job year on year is implementing the bill, is refining the bill, is executing the bill. And if we come in 18 months and we're having this conversation, the bill's been passed and nothing's happening, we would have learned something. But again, of the bills I know, and I mean, I haven't followed I'm not a lawyer, so I haven't followed the passing of the majority of our bills in as much detail. But the few that I have kind of watched the process, they've been a lot more disparate. They've been in hidden rooms with a few key stakeholders, and they've never really created robust implementation frameworks or plans in the passing of the bills. And so I hope that this will be different in that regard. And I make no promises, but I have seen that planning, and I hope that it's effective. I think that's, yeah.
I don't think there's anything to add to that.
So let me just okay. So let me just respond to your question. All right, thank you. When you look at the Nigeria Startup Bill, you've made a very valid, concern around the fact that you go into the bill, you see a particular part. I mean, for instance, the Pioneer start incentive scheme, right? Pioneer Status Incentive Scheme. When you look at the old bill, it's more or less like an harmonization, of existing laws and regulations. Now, the danger behind creating something, that is different from what we currently have is the fact that you struggle with implementation. And he has mentioned it. So you need to also, recognize extant laws that exist that you where to look at certain issues. Now, she mentioned regulatory sandboxes. You look at regulatory sandboxes. When you look at that particular aspect, you would see, the CBN is more or less like the